Welcome everyone to Crypto Hippies episode 9 3/4. This is an episode about polyamory and alternative dating. We have our experts here. We have Katie and Leandrew.
By no means an expert. I'm a noob. I'm a noob.
But basically just how dating is going to work in the future or already works now. And your personal experiences with the difference between polyamory and regular dating.
Well, I guess maybe a good place to start would just be to hang a little bit about our own histories with that. I've always been really curious about different ways that relationship structures or societal structures, any kind of structure could be done. So one thing that I looked into a lot, especially after seeing so many, are there other ways of doing? And I ended up digging into polyamory, non-monogamy, different types of lifestyles online years ago, and I'm at the point now where the majority, the majority of my relationship experience has been non-monogamous, with some of it being monogamous also. And I think that just coming to an understanding of how these dynamics work differently has been a really big part of my personal life process. I'm curious what others' experiences are with these things.
Why did you decide to try polyamory?
Initially, it was because my boyfriend at the time and I were in a long distance relationship. And we wanted to, and this was years ago. This was when we were 19 and 18, respectively. And so we didn't want to end our relationship, but we also didn't want to stop ourselves from having any kinds of experiences like during some very formative years. So we decided to open up. Later, it became more of a philosophical thing where I just started to like the ethos of non-monogamy better. Like the idea of having a type of love where it's acknowledging and open to the idea that people can have connections with multiple people was something that was appealing to me.
It definitely seems to give you more freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're all crypto hippies, so we like freedom.
What about
Cool.
you, Leandrew? How did you
Okay,
do
go ahead.
So for me, it's been definitely kind of a process. Like, throughout pretty much my entire life, I've been like a box breaker, just always figuring out what's right for myself and like what I really believe for myself and not like, just going based on what society expects of me. So, I mean, starting off at 12 years old when I became an atheist, at 19 or 20 when I started experimenting with psychedelics. And there's just been numerous major transitions in my life where I had to like really consider like what was the norm, what was expected, and what actually made sense to me personally. But until like slightly before me and Kelsey got together 6 years ago, relationship dynamics and all that had never really come under the same microscope that the rest of my life had. And honestly, like it kind of got triggered by, I knew a guy in Austin who was polyamorous, and like I was really interested in it, but I was definitely one of those people that thought like, oh no, it couldn't be me, like never me. There's just no way. But I was really curious, and in the sense of like, oh, this is like an alternative to what the societal expectation is, and so naturally it just caught my interest. But so me and Kelsey started dating, and there was a couple experiences I had that kind of like started making me take it a little bit more seriously. Before we had gotten together, I went on maybe like a 2-year period of really just focusing on building myself and like, working on my business and not really dating at all. It's kind of like a muscle or like anything else, like a plant, right? And like if you're not dating, if you're not like actually having those emotions and like, kind of delving into your sexuality, like it just kind of closes down a lot, right? And so in a lot of ways, my sexuality, my willingness to be in a relationship and all that, it had kind of died down in that time period. And so like as me and Kelsey are getting together and really exploring that, it just felt like it was opening back up, right? But the thing that was really scary to me at first is like, it wasn't just for her. Like when we started actually like, dating and really getting into it, like I started feeling more attracted to all women in general, just because it was like, you know, my sexuality is being opened back up, and like there's this part of my life that's like, you know, being re-energized. So there was that. Then there was also there was another bizarre experience where I realized how toxic my monogamy was. I should say. I met this girl at a coffee shop one day. And, you know, as soon as she walks in the door, like, you know, I felt like an immediate attraction, like this intuitive thing, like, oh my God, her. And then me and Kelsey have been together for 3 or 4 months at this point. And so I see her, and then, like, you know, she goes up and she orders her food, and she just walks right over and sits down at my table and just starts talking to me like out of nowhere. Just like, and we just hit it off, and it was like such an incredible connection and everything. Like, we talked for almost 2 hours, and just like tons of synchronicities and weird connections. And it got to the point where I started to feel like an overwhelming anxiety. And like, oh my God, like what? This isn't okay. Like, I'm with Kelsey. I shouldn't be feeling these feelings for anybody else. And it was actually a really awkward situation. I actually just kind of got up and was like, okay, it was nice meeting you. I gotta go. I just left after building this incredible connection. And who knows what it could have been? You know, maybe it could have been a friend had we already been into polyamory. Maybe that could have been, you know, a lover or whatever. Who knows what it could have been? But I started to realize then how much monogamy was closing down my ability to even just connect on a platonic level with the opposite sex.
I definitely see like that polyamory is much more popular among our generation, I think, than like maybe any previous generation.
Maybe the 1960s free love was
sort of the free love.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it maybe is kind of that feeling of FOMO that you described, you know, like, oh no, like, what am I missing out on by only, you know, doing this one thing with this one person, you know? And I think there's a lot of that in our culture.
Yeah, but for me in that moment, it wasn't even like a FOMO thing. It wasn't like I fear missing out on what this could be with this girl. I felt like I was almost cheating by getting this wrapped up into this experience with this girl and feeling these emotions that I had.
Right.
So I felt like I was
sort of guilt and
shame and all that.
I had that experience with these relationships too. When I was monogamous, I was very, very monogamous to a toxic level where if I felt any kind of connection with someone, and I guess I'm bisexual too, so I just didn't allow myself to get close to anyone because I had it in my mind that if I developed any kind of feelings that was wrong and a betrayal of my relationship. So it was a very unhealthy situation.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have very different and very, in some cases, kind of like strange ways that we grew up and learned about sexuality. And I think maybe a lot of that is sort of ingrained in American culture. And it just teaches us these crazy things about sex and sexuality and maybe it's not the most healthy thing.
I feel like I should just add before moving on from introductions, so that my most recent relationship was a monogamous one, and it was a very healthy monogamous one that ended for other reasons, just long-term compatibility issues that we saw. But now I really don't know what I want going forward because I can see benefits to both styles. Not that polyamory is necessarily just one style. There's a million different ways to do monogamy or polyamory, but I can kind of see benefits to the different ways of relating to.
What are your guys' thoughts on polyamory regarding children?
That's a good question.
That is a good question.
Personally, I think it could be a really great thing. Obviously, I'm not talking from experience at all, but I have researched. I mean, we studied it for 3 years before we actually decided to like delve into it. And I've seen a lot of polyamorous couples or triads that had kids. And honestly, it's kind of, it could end up being a better thing in a lot of ways. Because I mean, even in the monogamous world, there's a whole saying that it takes a tribe, right? It takes a tribe to raise kids. You need that support network. And in a lot of ways, I feel like for kids, they're getting additional father figures and additional mother figures, additional role models that can help not only help to teach them and take care of them.
Sort of decentralized
but
parenting.
it decentralizes the impact.
Oh my God.
I mean, benefits.
Centralized spooning.
There's forking and spooning.
I would say there's two sides of it. On the one hand, I completely agree with Leandrew, and I saw this, in times where I practice polyamory. It tends to really build tribes. Not that you can't build that with friendships too, but it tends to build very strong bonds and connections between groups of people, like extended networks. And I've met people and talked to people who were polyamorous and had kids, and that was one of the greatest benefits of it, is they had much larger, like extended family type support systems, and the kids were exposed to multiple different influences in a more intimate way. And I don't think that they necessarily, I never heard anybody say that a kid was freaked out about it inherently. It could be an issue with bullying at school and things like that. On the flip side, stable relationships, I think, are something that's good for kids. And when you're always open to new romance in your life, like it can add a layer of instability or chaos, which might not necessarily be the best thing. But you can be poly and be very stable as well.
It sounds a lot like maybe the beneficial aspects of tribalism. Often we talk about tribalism in a negative way, but that sounds like maybe there's some positive aspects to that. Have any of y'all read Sex at Dawn or heard of that book?
Yes.
Heard of it, haven't read it.
It sounds, the things you were describing sounds kind of like the ideas.
Oh yeah, no, Sex at Dawn is like the Bible of a lot of the polyamory sort of thinking. If you kind of look into a little, I mean, that's what I've found and what I've heard from different people is like, it's the cornerstone psychology research book, anthropology research, right? They're the ones that made the case that the bonobos that were closer from a DNA perspective to the bonobos who resolved their conflict through sex rather than through kind of tribal gangs like the gorillas or like the chimps or whatever. The research is definitely controversial and questionable, but that's basically the book for this kind of thinking.
Cool. I guess I should check it out then.
Yeah, I just love the image of solving conflict through sex. I just imagine like wars with just giant orgies in different parts of the world, like, that's how we solve our problems. Right?
When I get that feeling, I need sexual healing.
I mean, so I think we all are trying.
So King Jong-un and Donald Trump, just careful what you wish for.
What did you just? Why'd you bring Orange Man into this?
Conflict, man. Sorry.
So we're all striving for non-violence, right? I mean, I think that's kind of the main thing that ties all of us crazy anarchists together. Is that we're looking and pushing towards a world that has less violence. And
just FYI, not everybody here is anarchists, or maybe crazy, but not anarchists. Just
all right,
I want to pop the bubble, right? Because part of the sort of thing is like if we're all like, yeah, we're all in the same boat, that there's nothing to talk about, right? But
right.
yeah, so but I hear you.
I think we can all agree that we like peace, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, sure, peace is good.
And we dislike violence.
We're all peace.
Well,
for the most part.
In defense, it's a very useful thing. In aggression is bad. I can agree with that. Go on.
Okay, cool. Just getting that out of the way. So it would be in my view, it would be a really great thing for the world to be able to resolve conflicts with love instead of hate.
But how does it work among the chimps? Like, how do you decide who wins or what the conclusion of the argument is?
No, they literally form gangs. They form gangs, and then they just do the might makes right thing. Whereas the bonobos, they just fuck it off. They literally.
When you resolve conflicts with sex, you're not so much having a sexual fight. You're just getting really close to each other, and then you reach a new level of understanding.
All right.
Of course.
No, I think there's something to be said there for like when there's conflict, there's emotions and maybe anger or whatever, and those emotions they're chemical in nature, and you have to expend them some way. You can just let them sit around the body, or you can go on a sprint, right? You can do something physically, exert yourself physically. You could do some push-ups, or you could fuck it out.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's not a mystery to us. It's nothing unusual. Everybody knows about makeup sex,
Yeah.
I mean, it depends what kind of conflict it is. Like, if it's a conflict that's based on like miscommunication or like negative emotion, then like, sure, like some kind of sex or emotive bonding probably will help bridge the gap. But if it's a conflict about like a real issue where there's like, an irreconcilable difference or a different, like a zero-sum game in some way, then I don't like.
Yeah, like you're the daddy of my child, and you're gonna go live with this other little crew of polyamorous people, and who's gonna pay the bills, right? Like,
maybe you could discuss
right?
it while you're.
Of course, you could be responsible and polyamorous. Or, I mean, those are two separate things. I mean, at least I don't know that many polyamorous people, right? But I would, I would say like you can be responsible for your child and still sort of be doing your thing, but like. Yeah, so like there's big. I'm gonna make the monogamous case to sort of keep it interesting and sort of have some more profound discussion. One of the reasons, so I have this sort of particular concept which I think is important around this, because I've thought about the polyamory thing too for a few years. Of course, I've been around like libertarian anarchist circles for like 10 years, so I've heard this before. And one of the things that I've concluded is that the shortest path is a line between two dots. Like that's like mathematically like profound, right? You can't, it's undeniable that the shortest path is two dots in a line. When you add a third one, you literally multiply the complexity of communication that needs to happen. You literally have to over-communicate. You have to communicate maybe twice as much, because you have to communicate with two people enough, and then they have to communicate with each other enough for that to sort of, for the intimacy to scale, right? You could think of intimacy as something that you build up over time, and it probably has like an interest rate and a compounding effect, right? And so at some point it gets too complex. There's probably an edge of too many relationships, too many partners, right? Like humans have scarce computing power in their brains, and so you can't have like a polyamory kind of crew of 10,000 people, you literally don't have enough time to fuck them all. But sorry, go.
Yeah, and it takes time away from like other areas of life. I mean, not to like, I'm kind of like with Juan in some ways, but like I'm also sympathetic to the polyamory side. But it does take time away from other parts of life. And it's like if it were to be like typical to be in triads, then that's less time towards like productive activity and perhaps less time towards raising children.
It would require a lot of practice to get good at it, and then you hit your stride. You can spend a lot less brain power once you've gained the skills necessary to do all that communication.
Yeah, I'd like to share a flip side to that. If you're talking about triads specifically, you have a lot more relationships to deal with, but most families have more than two people in them once they start having kids, and those relationships are still just as profound. They're not necessarily sexual, but it does require that type of communication in order to create a healthy system. And like businesses, et cetera, can do a lot more if they have more than just two people involved in the structure. I had a brief experience where I was in, I guess you could say, a triad. It was destined to be short-term from the beginning because I was about to move. However, there was more communication involved at the onset, and it didn't go too long because of the circumstances. But I found that it was really nice. If there was three people hanging out, it was a lot easier to get chores done, like cooking and things like that. If one person was down, then there were two people there to support them. And if two people were arguing, then there was kind of a third party there that could act as a mediator. And I don't think it necessarily just adds more complication. It also adds more support. There's more potential for things to go wrong, so to speak, because there's more people involved, but there's also much more potential for things to go right. And if you build a strong system, it could be a more resilient system.
Agreed, 100%. I mean, you mentioned like the shortest distance between 2 points is, just a straight line between 2 points, but also the most stable structure in nature is the triangle. So
that is also
fair enough.
Isn't it the sphere? Didn't we talk about this a couple podcasts ago? That spheres are the most stable?
Yeah. Sphere would be most stable, but the triangle is the least complex, most stable structure. It's the slowest complexity, probably highest stability structure. I mean, I don't know how you can deal with like the line, right? Like there's no redundancy between two parties, right? Like one person dies and then the relationship's over. There's no relationship no longer. There's a relationship with the self, right? So you can have a relationship, you yourself can have a relationship with yourself, and you can consider that a line as well, and then you have a relationship with the other person and they with themselves. But that's like another layer of complexity. So we can.
Well, in terms of the analogies to geometry, we can like, as far as triangles and circles are concerned, we can look at that in terms of polarity, right? Triangle and circle are two fundamental shapes at a very base level, even though they're differently derived. So, make of that what you will.
Well, and a circle jerk is definitely not the most stable structure.
You should have Limp Biscuit.
Okay, to move a little bit away from the geometry towards history, like I guess I don't see that non-monogamous societies. It's hard. Like, okay, in terms of like societies within a civilized context, it seems like monogamous societies are far more stable.
Yeah. That's actually really...
historically does seem to be the case.
Like I mean, in a society.
What's that, Ariel?
Yeah, sorry. Go on. You finish your point.
I was just going to bring up some examples, but I mean, it seems like in like non-monogamous societies or like societies that are like polygynous, there's a surplus of men, and I guess if it was going both ways, that maybe wouldn't be the case. But it seems like there's a surplus of men, so it tend to be societies that were warlike, where a lot of men would die. And in like a lot of like smaller, more modern, like culty kind of polygamous societies, it seems like a big part of the instability of this, like this, the couples are less stable, like they break up more, which is like terrible for children and causes like it's not good for children. And it also like, not to be like a total downer in this conversation, but it seems like most cults where there's like a free love like ethos, there's like a sexual abuse of children is very common. And I mean, maybe that's just the cults aspect, not the polygamy aspect. Like it probably isn't necessarily the case, but that is a trend. Like that is.
So I think it's important to point out that polygamy and polyamory are actually different.
Also very important.
Yeah, actually, yeah, you bring up a lot of ideas that really require a deep delve into psychology. For example, the polygamy, where you have some sort of alpha male trying to monopolize, their access to the females. Like that's a really ego-based and ego-centered, self-centered kind of mentality. And I think the idea with polyamory is that, like, it's not just polygamy; it's everybody's open, right? It's not just that the man can be open to go and do whatever he wants. It's that everyone's open. But you bring up some really good points about society and about, for the past 2,000 years, perhaps we shouldn't just totally disregard the idea, the monogamy ideas that have been set, that we've used in society, and that seem to have propelled us into quite an interesting place, quite a successful place in a lot of ways. So, there's a lot of ways to look at that.
The
go ahead.
monogamy of the past 2,000 years hasn't been the kind of romantic monogamy that people are aspiring towards now. It's a completely different type of structure where you have two people joining together for social reasons, and maybe they have some kind of attraction to each other. It's not even necessarily monogamy either. It was just a monogamous partnership, but then a lot of mistresses and things like that on the side. It's one man, one woman.
But no, hang on. Like it's not just that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to point out something that I we glossed over last time. Earlier, you said that one of the cool things about polyamory, as far as childbearing goes, is that there's a tribe, right? Because it takes a village to raise a child. But like the village was usually like the family, right? At least in monogamous societies, you don't just marry somebody and leave, and your grandma's sort of fucked, right? Like you have your family and your extended family around, and there's cousins, and maybe your brothers have children, right? And so there is a tribe in monogamous relationships as well. Yeah. And all relationships don't have to be sexual to be intimate, right? So you can have a brotherhood or a sister relationship, or a mother or father, right? Like friendship, right? Like there's many forms of relationship. And I'm not saying that it's, again, I'm not saying that doesn't prove or doesn't argue that it's bad to have multiple sexual relationships, but it's an example of where you can have a rich wealth of intimacy that is non-sexual and still have a tribe. So, okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
And you can build it through friends too. Well, and I think one thing that we're seeing more in our modern age, that sounds cliche to say, but I think people are choosing tribes more than they're sticking with their tribe that they were born into, because I think people are becoming or striving to be more and more self-actualized. And like do what's best for them individually, especially in the US where we have this super individualistic culture. People don't necessarily feel like they fit in with where they grew up, so they went out on their own, and a lot of monogamous relationships have become extremely lonely in the US, and now we're seeing move towards more chosen tribal. That can be done through non-monogamy or not. It's just that non-monogamy seems to naturally lend itself to it.
Yeah, that's a good point that I've heard a lot of people that advocate monogamy. They're, the polyamory community says, oh, well, you've got all the support, you've got all these extra people, and the monogamy community says, well, we can have all of the support. There's a reason we have godfathers and godmothers and godchildren. The idea of that is community support. So it's not like monogamy is preclusive to community support.
No, it's not.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a way to have community under both. For sure.
The pair bonding through sex does tend to be one of the strongest bonds that you can have with someone.
Yeah,
that's true.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like there's a lot of benefits to the various non-monogamous models, and I mean, it might be the wave of the future. I don't know. I mean, I guess my experience has been more like I did non-monogamy for a long time, and I just thought it was what all millennials did everywhere, but apparently it's not.
So you were actually polyamorous, or you were just non-monogamous, where you kind of just
both at various points in time. But now I'm kind of like seeing more the point of the monogamy side of things. Like, it's like there are values that go with monogamy, and part of one of the values is like the value of sacrifice. The idea that something becomes more valuable when you sacrifice something for it. And I just see like, I guess I kind of am skeptical, and I know everyone's gonna like question this, like give counterexamples, but I kind of question if a non-monogamous relationship can be as deep as a monogamous relationship. Like it seems that there's something that lacking, like that element of sacrifice and exclusivity.
I don't think that's fair at all. I mean, for example, in me and Kelsey's particular situation, I mean, we've been together going on 6 years now. And we're very committed to each other. We're building our future together. We built a business together. We don't have kids at this point, but we will. We have this commitment to each other that, hey, we're in this together. And this is like, we're in this journey. If we have other partners on the side, it doesn't take away from that commitment in any way, shape, or form. I get that there's a sacrifice, but I mean, like, I don't feel like we're not sacrificing by deciding to spend our, most of our time together and to build things together, to, build our lives together. I felt like there's always an inherent sacrifice in that.
So there's one of the concepts in polyamory, as far as I know, is that you choose a primary, and I guess I'm sure there's 100 different setups, but you have a primary and then you have secondaries if you wish. So it sounds like you and Kelsey are primaries to each other, and then maybe there's sort of secondaries. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And again, like you said, there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Yeah, I just want to say not every non-monogamous relationship has a primary. Some people choose to make themselves their primary and only have relationships that would be considered secondary. Some people have like a primary type group. Some people choose not to label anything and like the relationships to be more in flux. I don't know how stable it will turn out forward, but
what about the concept?
I just wanted to say, in terms of monogamous relationships versus non-monogamous relationships, and if they can become as close or as intimate, I think it builds a different kind of intimacy and a different kind of sacrifice. If you have a primary non-monogamous partner as opposed to a primary monogamous partner, there's something really special to being with someone and experiencing the part of that person, your partner, like watching them fall in love and allowing yourself to go through all those scary emotions for them and be with them and build that trust that you're going to be together even if you start having feelings for someone else is also a different kind of sacrifice and a different kind of intimacy. And you see sides of your partner that you wouldn't if you were monogamous. But you're also right. There's a certain kind of bonding that happens even just chemically if you're only with each other and deciding to only be with each other and reserve a specific part of yourselves for each other builds another type of intimacy as well. But it's really just a different kind of relationship.
Yeah, great. I just want to give a practical example about that. There's like a special relationship that guys will have with each other, or that girls will have with each other when you're talking about being with your best guy friends, and like, you know, when you're going through the experience of like falling in love with this girl, and you can just talk about it with your bros. Or like for girls, the same sort of thing, right? There's like the camaraderie that you have about, you know, being able to share those sort of feelings, or like even like, you know, if neither of you are dating, being able to be on the hunt together, just having that whole thing. Like there's a camaraderie that comes with that, right? And on the flip side, often in monogamy, there's a wall, there's a boundary in between partners, because they feel like they can't, like most partners feel like if I even communicate an attraction to somebody else, that's a huge no-no. And like, you know, that can end up being like a huge boundary. Like we just became like officially polyamorous in the last few months. But for the last 3 years or 4 years, we've been able to share like with each other that, hey, you know, I'm attracted to that person, or I like this one, or you like that person, don't you? And it's a cool, fun thing. It's like a wall that we don't have between each other that most couples have. And to me, that's a way in which I felt closer with her than anybody else I've ever dated.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Whether
So what do you
go forward in monogamy or non-monogamy in a future relationship or relationships, that's a wall that I'll refuse to have again.
So how about the concept of open monogamy? Basically, you have a primary, essentially. For the most part, you're monogamous with each other. Not because you're holding each other, like you're not allowed to go meet anyone or sleep with anyone or anything like that. But, but you just sort of gravitate towards that way, but you don't place restrictions on your partner.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, you're saying like you don't actually do anything physical outside of the monogamous relationship, but you talk about your attractions to your partner.
More so that there's an absence of rules. It's like, okay, look, I'm only seeing you, right now, and I really like you. You're an awesome person. But neither, like, I love you so much that I don't want to place restrictions on you and give you rules and tell you what you can and can't do, that you can't kiss another person, or you can't sleep with another person. It's sort of like, yes, we're monogamous, or we have that kind of idea, like generally we're monogamous, but it's an open in a sense that I don't restrict you.
I mean, that's one of the most common flavors of polyamory. I always like to think about it like a spectrum or a gradient. There's there's extreme monogamy on this end. There's the people that are so monogamous that, if they look at another person, their partner will get pissed, and it could be the end of the relationship. And then you have people that are so polyamorous that they just constantly date and have sex with a multitude of different people, and they never have any sort of long-term bonded relationship. There are those extremes, and there's everything in between. And I feel like one of the biggest mistakes that we make as people is that we don't realize that there's such a spectrum, and so we don't fully consider and reflect to ourselves where we might actually belong on that spectrum, or where we might most naturally gravitate to if we didn't just automatically assume that we're just supposed to be monogamous,
So
as I understand, go ahead.
I think to kind of flip what Anthony was saying, right? There's this expectation of not having rules, but then I think there's something to say about choosing not to choose anybody else, and having that really strong commitment to work on meeting the needs of that one person, and really focusing on that and expending your energy on just making sure that the other person in your life has, everything that you can provide for them. So choosing that voluntarily, whether there are rules or no rules in place.
I think there's a lot of value to that. If we're going to try and, help the world and help each other, you got to start, like kind of Juan said, with that line, right? That other point. You've got to be able to help at least one other person before you can be, awesome at helping and being with a bunch of people.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some context here that I also find is probably important, and this is talked about in the Sex at Dawn book. It seems to be that marriage and monogamy all the way up to let's say the 28th century. I don't want to say that there was no love in it. It was much more pragmatic and strategic than the way that we conceive of romance and love today. Like it was like,
yeah, it's like a business contract.
There's families, and then there's, you're thinking about your bloodline, and you're thinking about the children, and there's sort of like, there's wealth moving around, and there's defined roles, right? Like today we live in a world where both men and women work and they both pay taxes. Back in the day, it was like men do most of the work and women had sort of they were more like housekeeping and raising the children. They had a different set of responsibilities, and they were like more or less sort of differentiated. And then that's more or less where marriage as an institution, as a kind of contract emerged. And then we transitioned into the sort of, the First World War and the Second World War. And when all these men went and died in the battlefields of Europe, right, women had to kind of figure some way to make some money, right? And on top of that, we had a bunch of innovations. We had the washing machine, the clothing washing machine, the dishwashing machine, all this technology that just automated a bunch of the work that women had to do at home to keep a home sort of nice and habitable and comfortable, like a space where you want to go and chill and rest, right? A lot of that stuff got automated, right? And so women now had a lot of extra time, and okay, great. So and then you already had the public schools, which were meant to raise children, so the kids are spending 8 hours a day on this, being raised by strangers. And so what are women going to do? Well, they're going to go to work, right? And so they start working, and all this stuff. And then as part of that, there's the creation of no fault divorce, right? So before, you couldn't just divorce your husband because you're bored, right? Which of course women maybe were bored because there's nothing to do at home, right? And so, I don't know, right? Who knows exactly what the history of this was, but I'm just kind of painting with thick brush. And so the creation of no-fault divorce led to this massive boom of divorces, right? Like the divorce rate in the West is something, as far as I know, it's an incomprehensible growth. Like it just,
over half.
It was a culturally speaking, a nuclear bomb. And my parents got divorced, and I'm curious how many of your parents got divorced. And the effect of that is that we've kind of lost a role model of what is a healthy sort of monogamous relationship, right? And there's definitely unhealthy monogamous relationships, right? So
I think a lot of that conflict centers around children. Why is it such a big deal for us? Why do all those conflicts happen? Why have things been structured the way they are? And I think most of that centers around children. For example, let's suppose that you have two partners and both of them want to have kids, right? Monogamy has been a way of dealing with the issue of how do we have children? How do we maintain the best that we can do in society? And so far, there hasn't been any institutionalized or well explored ways of, if you want two partners, how do you have kids with both of them? Or how do you progress? How do you create social contracts and constructs to handle that in a way that's beneficial for everyone?
It's kind of a choose your own adventure game at this point. People are figuring it out in the way that's best suited to them. I don't know that we will see common polyamorous non-monogamous structures, or if non-monogamy is more of a breaking down of certain kinds of structures and allowing people to create relationships that are more custom to them.
I like that answer. Get creative. We don't quite know yet what are maybe some of what's more in tune with our psychology and our evolution, our history. But kind of like Jordan Peterson talks about, maybe there's a little bit of chaos that needs to be ventured into so that we can explore this idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna. It's an interesting point that we're kind of circling around. So I have this kind of idea that people go through. Well, this is not my idea, but there's this sort of idea that people go through really hard times, and then from those hard times, very strong and stable structures emerge out of the chaos and the suffering, right? And the sort of structures emerge, and then those structures are strong enough that they create a massive amount of wealth and abundance. And the generation born into that abundance, well, they enjoy it for a while, and then the next generation enjoys it, and so on and so forth, until there's a point where the generation, there's some generation that just doesn't even remember, the memory of the suffering of their ancestors is completely completely gone. Like it's just, you know, in some book, in some library somewhere.
It's there genetically.
And so what? Maybe no, but not really. I mean, no, the genetic, like for the genetic information to become useful, you have to have self-knowledge to be able to like appreciate that impulse, right? But then you can also like attack it internally, right? So anyway, we can talk about sort of things like jealousy and feelings like that for sure a little bit, you know, a little bit later on. But like, so maybe we're in a point. I mean, for sure, we're at a point where we've forgotten why a lot of these things exist. And so we're just disregarding them and going down into sort of, you know, the details of the thing and to figure out what the fundamentals are, right? And maybe the result is going to be, yeah, we're going to discover a lot of the suffering from the past, but maybe we'll find some new stuff because things have changed in many ways. And so we'll find some new gold in the you know, in the chaos in a sense or whatever, right? And so
the circumstances that created the institution of monogamy are not the same circumstances that we're in now. So for a lot of people, it's starting to feel restrictive.
I mean, I think part of it is like kind of like what Juan was getting at. Like it's like a bit of the Jordan Peterson thing, like rescuing your father from the bottom of the ocean. It's like we have all these rules from the past. Like the previous justification for the rules, which is like Christianity, is pretty much gone for most people. And so like these rules kind of seem superfluous and we're like, oh, let's just throw away the rules. Right. But really, in a lot of cases, there was a good reason for the rule that still applies today, but that we've forgotten.
Right. And we have to experience bad times in order to figure out which things are actually still valuable and we should keep around, and which things are not valuable anymore and should be cast off.
In terms of self-reflection and sort of looking at the truth of our existence, you know, I think at this moment in history, we're confronted with maybe some conflicting data, right? On the one hand, humans are not monogamous like penguins are monogamous. Like penguins naturally just tend towards monogamy, right? But no matter where you look in human history, you see a lot of promiscuity, even in societies that are supposed to be monogamous. So there's this nature, seemingly human nature, to be somewhat promiscuous. While seems like there's also this really good advice that was given to us from our fathers' fathers and mothers' mothers through religion and stories and tales, and there seems to be monogamy seems to have been coincidental with a lot of good outcomes for society. So you know, it's kind of like we're at a place where we really have to self-reflect and be honest and try and find some new systems.
That's one of the most important things. Like for me, I think monogamy is great. I don't think polyamory is for everybody. I think there are some people that, well, whether it be their how they were genetically coded or their life experience and stuff like that you should just be monogamous. And for other people, that's not the case, right? But whatever your choice be, like I think the most important thing that we do is do that self-reflection and figure out, like, you know, what's true for us. You know, again, monogamy is a beautiful thing, but I think it's even more beautiful when two people really reflect and consider the alternative sincerely and decide not to do that based on their own self-reflection and what's really true to themselves.
Two people or one person or however.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I guess like the way I see it is like there could be a few different models that stabilize. Like one model I could see stabilizing is it maybe since like the period of having children being in the world has like extended, like maybe it becomes common for people to be non-monogamous in their like 20s and then to be monogamous in their 30s when they have kids, and that's like a model where the kid question becomes a little bit more irrelevant. I guess in terms of like the long-term stability of a non-monogamous partnership or polyamorous partnership, like there's things for me, like I kind of question it because I feel like the nature of human emotion is unpredictable in a lot of ways. And when you open up a relationship in that way, especially in a situation where you're looking for stability, like when there's children, like if there's two people, a couple who's like a primary partners, and they're looking to stay together, but the relationship is open and they're dating other people, like what happens if they fall in love with someone else? And like presumably, I guess they've made the commitment to stay in that initial partnership. Like to what extent is that fair to the secondary person? Feelings develop differently when you're like in a relationship having sex with someone versus if it's like a coworker that you find attractive. It's just a different, like you're opening the relationship up to a lot of chaos.
kind of see that as a problem regardless.
That can happen in a monogamous relationship as well. Like someone has a moment of weakness and cheats on someone or falls in love with someone. Either way you look at it, I don't think the problem is solved at that level, at a systemic level. It has to be more like about interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence and
so this is great, because I think one of the things that it needs to be about is what it used to be about, which was about raising children. Like today we look at romance as this sort of platonic kind of like Shakespearean romance, right? Where you find the one, and then the one, and you go and float around in heaven and you ride unicorns and stuff. And that is true for certain periods of time. And it's also true that you're going to be wanting to like probably murder each other at times. And if all you're in it is for the joys of it, and you're not in it for something bigger than your own immediate relationship, then you're just going to cave during the weakness, maybe, right? But if you have a greater vision, which is, okay, we're going to raise healthy, strong children and create an empire or whatever, right? Build a castle or something like that. Then now you have your partners on a mission. And that's the anchor, like the anchor that lets you get through the shit, right? And maybe that can include a secondary, I don't know, right? I mean, I certainly like the idea of casual threesome with my wife, right? But
I kind of believe in that like romantic love thing, like the romanticism. Like I kind of do think that like sometimes, and this isn't to like disparage anybody's relationship specifically, like I think everyone is different and there's different kinds of love and value, and people can be completely in love and be poly. But I kind of do believe in that romantic love thing. I think sometimes there is like one person in your life that it will only happen once, and like you fall like completely deeply in love, and it's like it can't be compared to anything else. And just to like try to introduce other people, I think not to judge anyone, but I think it can cheapen it.
I have a question for you. This is like, like down to the roots, down to the base, down to the essence of things, right? I think there's so romantic love is the only type of love within our society that we view as that it has to be mutually exclusive. And that there's no real basis for that. Like, I mean, if you think about your love for your parents, right? Your love for one parent doesn't detract from your love for another parent. If you have multiple siblings, because you love one sibling, it doesn't detract from your love for another sibling. If you have kids, you can love all of your kids evenly. Like a love for one kid doesn't take away from love for another kid. So I'm wondering, why do we feel like, why do we have this assumption that romantic love has to be mutually exclusive? That if you fall head over heels for one person, that you both do that with another person, or that if you did that with another person, it would detract from your love for the first person?
I'll bring up the Greek model of love. Like the Greeks identify 4 different kinds of love. Philia, which is love for a friend, like eros, which is romantic love, storge, which is love for family, and agape, which is like love of like altruistic love. And I don't need to go into all 4 in detail, but like with philia, like with friend love, there's a different basis for the love than in other kinds of love. Like in friend love, it tends to be that there's like a common area of interest that gets discussed and like explored together, like a world that's explored together, and kind of the connection in that kind of love. Whereas in storge, like familial love, it's more like they're just there and they're always there, and that's like an affection that grows around just them being there. But with eros, it's like it's of a different nature than the other kinds of love. Because with eros, there's like a completing. There's like some way in which you're an incomplete person, and then that other person either fills that space or teaches you to be more complete. And I mean, I guess that could happen with 3 people or with some other variable. I guess that would be, a basis for answering that question. I think they're different. The love is different.
They are different kinds of love. I think that deep into a relationship with one person and don't at least have strong friendships outside of that, you can feel complete in the moment, but then once you get outside of that and start meeting other people, you realize there were so many aspects of yourself that were not being fulfilled. I don't think that one person really can complete another, or that they should.
Right.
I like to look at relationships more as 2 individuals coming together and enriching each other's lives, but I don't like or believe in the model of 2 people completing each other.
The soulmate model.
Maybe it's not complete, but it's more like in romantic love, they show you something that you've never seen before, like a whole new perspective. Whereas I don't necessarily think that's the case in the other kinds.
I was saying, I think all relationships are like that personally. To me, all relationships serve as a mirror, whether it be a friend or a familiar relationship. They all serve as a mirror that can show you different aspects of yourself and vice versa.
One thing that happened to me when I started having non-monogamous relationships is the lines between eros and philia and these different kinds of love kind of blurred. They became less separate concepts in my mind and more continua. I don't think that they're as separate as we might think that they are. Like, we try to categorize our relationships in really strict ways, but a platonic relationship could be just as fulfilling and leading as one that had sexuality in it. And I think that's one thing that our monogamous culture does that might kind of damage us is it devalues other types of love, and it kind of makes the assumption that whoever you're dating immediately becomes the most important person in your life because you have a sexual connection. There are biological factors that make it feel that way, but I guess we can get into jealousy and like the biological drives later. But now that I've dated quite a bit and had some more experience in life, I've realized that those things fade, and I kind of think of the new love as like an initial high, and you have to get through it and kind of maintain your sanity through it in order to evaluate.
Then what's stopping you in polyamorous relationships to just continue chasing that high from person to person to person? Like, where is the is there always stability in that relationship where you're continuously going from one to another?
Some people do that. I think that's a big downfall of polyamory. Some people do. They call them NRE addicts, new relationship energy addicts, and that's a potential downfall of the model. But you don't have to be that way. And I think also being non-monogamous allows you to have more experience, so then you learn how to manage them more.
That even exists in monogamy. It's called serial monogamy. You date one person and then another person and another every few months, and you just serial monogamy.
Serial monogamy.
I think that's actually probably what humans are more biologically driven towards, is serial monogamy, like relationships lasting a couple years, basically the amount of time to be pregnant, get pregnant, and get to where the kid can kind of walk.
There you go, kid. You can walk. Have fun.
So let me just bring something up.
No, there's no way. I don't really believe that there is only one soulmate. I think that there's probably more than one person that you can be, in a sense, soulmates with. But it's also true that every individual is unique by kind of like physics, right? Like no two people are born in the same place at the same time. And so we're going to be shaped by just nurture alone. We're going to be shaped differently. And then the nature side of it is also very complex and rich. And so every individual is going to have its own unique kind of magic. And so every relationship that you have with somebody, whatever relationship that is going to have its own uniqueness. But there can probably be other people that you can build that very sort of, the highest of forms, like the eros form of love with, or I don't know if eros is only erotic, because obviously it comes from the word erotic, eros, right? Or erotic comes from eros, right? But like the sort of the archetype of love that we're talking about, the archetype of the best form of romantic relationship we can have, that can probably happen with multiple people, but each person you have that with, if you have it with multiple, is going to be unique in its own way. And just like you could argue that there's no reason why there should only be one person for you, there's also no reason why there isn't just one person that you could have the best relationship with. And this goes back to my argument of the two dots, right? Like if you find one of those special people and you both decide to build this thing together and build this life together and have children and all this stuff and go through the hellfires and build this heaven or whatever, then you probably will accumulate, like the effort that you put in accumulates on top of itself, and it builds up and it becomes so great, or it can become so great that nothing really kind of can compare, right? Like the amount of investment you would have to put into another relationship to make it catch up would, at some point, because we're mortals, it becomes impossible, right? That's the math, that's the geometric argument that I have for it, I guess, right? But
I think there are trade-offs. It's like if you decide to live in one place and stay home most of the time and really build your community at home, versus if you decide to be a person who moves around a lot, versus if you decide to be a person who lives in one place most of the time but travels or has two home bases. Like there's trade-offs with any of those models. And I think monogamy and non-monogamy
So let me just bring something up. So this being a crypto hippie show, my belief is that basically the internet and the connectedness of the world are changing the economic incentives to a high degree that it seems to be accelerating. And so my belief is that, of course, crypto is going to become more popular as time goes on because the incentives are changing. Do we think that polyamory is maybe, while not economically a good decision, when you get into any kind of association with other people, you're doing it for your own benefit. You're saying, I'm going to associate with this person or this group of people because I get some kind of benefit from doing that. And you're just going to quit. You're just going to quit the relationship if you're no longer getting that benefit. If basically being by yourself is more valuable to you than being with those people.
Well, it seems like governments have attempted to force the economy. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I was going to say, just pose this question to the group. Are the new incentives being created by this new technology creating a future system of incentives such that polyamory actually is like a winning, like economically rational choice for a large swath of the population?
It's like a lot of triads that live together and split bills 3 ways rather than 2 ways. Agree with that.
Right, exactly. Like just the fact that we communicate so much better and we can download so much more information from other people so much faster than we could in the past. I'm thinking like maybe, this kind of monogamy, this kind of like, culturally enforced monogamy was really a great thing and really a stabilizing force for past civilizations that didn't have as high bandwidth communication that we have now. Are things changing such that polyamory, like in the near future, could become actually the dominant mode of being?
Well,
So
I don't know. Can you say that it's been successful if we're looking at those old models, right? And a lot of the reasons for monogamous relationships was because men were there to protect women from wars, from invaders, et cetera, the might makes right thing. And families kind of like passed on their daughters to men to protect them. For example, in my clans, there was a hardball rule that no woman would be married to anybody any family who had any kind of abusive men in there, right? So that was an extremely strict thing when marriages were planned around like clan duty, etc. So now what we're seeing is there is no incentive for men to commit to women anymore. And now we have this plethora of single mothers that are struggling, that have no protection and nobody to provide for them during those formative years when they're pregnant and have to take care of, a human being that can't do anything by themselves.
The point I wanted to make with where Chris was talking about the economics of monogamy and children. And, I think we have governments and legislation which has attempted to sort of create economic incentives towards monogamy. And unfortunately, maybe in the last few decades, we've seen a reversal of that, where there's actually a lot of incentives for women to divorce their husbands. There's sort of cash and prizes involved for doing so. In terms of a more open and free society, I definitely see the opportunity where we can sort of create economic models that serve whichever desire you have, right? If you would like to enter monogamy and sort of even have a contractual nature about it because you're raising kids in a family and you're going to have shared resources. I think that can work out, and I think we can create economic models that serves polyamory as well.
Economic models will serve and give added incentive to relationships, but I think that we need to look beyond that to maybe it's kind of romantic seeming, but if people want to stay together, they're going to make a big effort despite the economic models. Like women who love their husbands aren't going to just divorce them because there's some money at the table. Like those factors come into play when
absolutely
isn't good. They don't really come into play when the relationship is good.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of, we complain about the government a lot. And I think we've seen a lot of aberration and messing with the incentives for people to stay together. Like Anastasia was talking about, there's a lot of single mothers in society. And that's created by a number of different causes, right? One is the government putting people in jail for possession of marijuana flowers. That's destroyed the African American community in America to a significant degree. But it's not just Black people; it's all of us. Like there's all kinds of really skewed incentives for people to act in ways that are not beneficial for us in a social construct, but it has been economically beneficial for certain entities. One way an idea that I like is. Why do we believe something, right? It's possible to be correct, to have a correct belief, but to have arrived there for the wrong reasons. right? And it's also possible for us to have used really good logic, but still arrived at the wrong conclusion because the data that we took in was incorrect. And so when we talk about, well, should I personally be monogamous or should I be polyamorous? You know, what should I do and how should I act? I think a big question is, why have you made that decision, right? Am I monogamous because, you know, I've got maybe some kind of emotional hangups, you know, where I'm afraid of being alone, right? And I have sort of maybe an ego towards controlling other people. Am I monogamous because of all those reasons? And you might generally call that jealousy, a lot of those emotions. Or am I monogamous because I'm choosing this one person, because not because out of fear, but out of love? You know, and I think those same criteria can be used across the board.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, I don't know, I haven't really come up with my views on this yet, but I feel like people need to experiment for themselves. That sounds horrible because you're talking about interpersonal relationships. So experimenting with your interpersonal relationships is kind of
guaranteed to leave somebody hurt.
Yeah, guaranteed to leave some people hurt. Yeah. But I think that people do need relationship experience in order to get to know themselves and to get to know what works best for them. And also, depending on who you're with, like if you meet one type of person and you have one type of dynamic, you two might work together really well in a monogamous relationship. But those same two people with different partners might really flourish in non-monogamous relationships, just depending on how they relate to each other and what kind of relationship they.
So getting into a little bit more of the practical aspects, so we've been really kind of deep in the philosophy, but maybe on a practical level, like imagine a situation where you met someone new, sort of outside of your network or your tribe, and you don't really know much about the person. How do you broach the subject of polyamory? Is it like a really natural thing? You're like, oh yeah, you know, my girlfriend, this and that. You know, how do you start that conversation? Does anyone have experiences with, you know, like on a practical level, how do you do that?
You have more experience than I do.
Our polyamory experts over here.
Well, I don't know if I call myself an expert. On a practical level, well, at different times in my life, I tend to just talk about philosophical subjects that interest me a lot. So people would hear pretty quickly that I was non-monogamous, and it would just come up naturally. If I'm on online dating apps and I'm looking for something non-monogamous, I always put it in my profile. So just straight
honesty from the beginning, then.
Yeah, just straight honesty from the beginning. I don't think it's a good idea to do anything other than straight honesty from the beginning with that, especially since we have such a monogamous norm in our society. If you start seeing someone and then a few months down the road tell them that you're non-monogamous, they're going to feel really betrayed most of the time.
By the way.
Yeah. I think you just need to be really upfront about it. It's never been an issue. Like maybe it's a little bit awkward the first few times that you talk about it, but I would love to see more norms where people talk about that in the beginning of relationships anyway, whether they're monogamous or non-monogamous, and what kinds of things they're looking for and what their experiences have been if you're getting into a romantic relationship, because I don't think that it can just be assumed that people have the same ideas. Even if both of you say that you want a monogamous relationship, people have very different ideas about flirting, have very different ideas about friends of the opposite sex.
Define monogamy.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. And honestly, like when we first started talking about it, there was a time period, we had been together for about 2 years at this point, and we had just started talking about it, and we almost broke up just because the conversation had become that intense. But we came to a point within, a couple weeks after it had reached a precipice, and realized that we just want, let's just try going out to the clubs and just like dancing with other people and feeling free to just flirt, obviously not taking it any further than that, but let's just feel what that feels like. And honestly, up to that point, that had been one of the most fun nights we had ever gone out together. It was just so freeing and liberating that even if we never made it any further than that, just the freedom to know that we can flirt with other people and we don't have to feel weird about that in any way, shape, or form. If I see her talking to a guy at a club, she doesn't have to have this weird boundary in between her and this other person, because there's this expectation that if she's talking to this guy, then deep down the subconscious thing is oh my God, is she going to leave me for that person? It's always where the subconscious jealousy comes from.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of approaching sort of self-development, helping each other to develop, even in a monogamous relationship, maybe to explore a little bit, to help look inside, leverage each other's, perspectives and, the reflection of each other. To looking inside, it may be some issues that are easy to paint over and forget about, but maybe we should bring to the surface.
I guess one perspective in like polyamory that I don't see focused on as much is the perspective of the person who's not in the relationship, but who's dating one of the people in the relationship.
Good point.
And I guess I see a lot of the time the way it's talked about is like, oh, it's so great for the couple, and like we're learning, we're growing, and we're learning, and it's it almost like. And again, I feel like not talking about any one specific situation, because I think, in specific situations, things can go very differently from what I've seen in my life happen. So it's like not talking about any one specific situation, but I've often seen that like that third outsider person get like shafted, like super shafted.
You're totally right. That's a big issue that polyamorous people, like if you go to polyamorous communities or polyamorous meetups, they talk about a lot. I don't know if anybody's heard of the term unicorn hunting. That's one of the most common models of couples opening up their relationship. We're looking for a woman who's going to date us both and nobody else, and she's going to love us both equally immediately, but she's not actually going to have an active role in our relationship. She's just like somebody that we're going to use for sex and to enrich ourselves as a couple.
Objectification.
It can be very exploitative.
I
would caution like women in their early 20s, like it's so like sold, like it's sold, or at least in my experience, it was like sold as this like wonderful thing. It's not always so.
No, it's not. I mean, there's people entering into non-monogamy with really unhealthy dynamic. No, I think you have to break down the notion of coupledom a little bit if you're going all the way polyamorous, and see yourselves as individuals who are choosing to be with each other at different times. Not that you can have a primary relationship and be polyamorous and have secondary relationships, but people who talk about non-hierarchical polyamory and who talk about like being literally open to everything, you can't view it from the perspective of a couple as a unit. I think you have to start viewing it from the perspective.
Well, that's kind of my concern. Like, so all people have needs and all people have emotions. How do you spread the time to be able to meet the emotional needs of more like yourself and then another person, and then putting another person into that mix? And now you have these three very emotional creatures, right? Or even adding a fourth, right? You have these four really emotional creatures, and you have to balance all of those emotions, and you have to balance all of those needs, and then you have to balance desires and fulfillment for the future. I think there is maybe even a little bit more responsibility involved in that balancing act than in monogamous relationships. So how do you deal with that?
I mean, it takes emotional intelligence, and it takes thought and reflection and all that sort of stuff, just as it would take if you had three kids versus having one kid, and making sure that each kid feels loved and taken care for and all that. I mean, one thing that's super important, like I view love as infinite. That's where my question came from with the mutual exclusivity. I don't believe that romantic love is mutually exclusive, but time isn't infinite. So that's definitely something that you really have to take consideration for and try to plan for. And everybody has different answers for that. For some people, dating and having lovers and processing and all that sort of stuff. For some polyamorous people, that's their entire life. That's all they want to do. So they have much more bandwidth to be able to have partners and fully make sure those partners' emotional needs are taken care of. For other people like myself, I know I could not date three people. That's way too much. There's no way I could ensure that everybody felt like they were taken care of, and that everybody felt like important and valued and all that. I feel like I can date two people, and that's kind of where my thing is. But for everybody, that answer is different, just depending on who you are, what your values are, and
I think it's like valence on atoms, right? Like each person has one slot for one partner, or 2 slots for 2 partners. Maybe for a carbon atom, you have 4 slots.
Yeah, because some people are more independent and some people are more codependent, right? For some people, they really need that alone time, and so they don't want to be with somebody 24/7 all day, every day, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely the 1 slot person. I'm definitely with you, Anastasia, on the I just don't understand how I can possibly take care of my own needs and the needs of somebody else and the needs of a third person. That just seems overwhelming to me.
Well,
and maybe if I got a lot of experience, doing that, then maybe eventually I'd get good at it enough and efficient at it enough to have enough time to do everything.
And also,
Chris is gonna learn to juggle.
Depleting. You don't have to think of it as I'm taking care of my own needs and I'm taking care of the needs of this other person and I'm taking care of the needs of this other person. They're also taking care of your needs. And depending on the structure, even if they're not dating, they could also be taking care of each other's needs. It's not necessarily wow, you're spreading yourself so thin. You could be having a more enriching group experience. So it's another possibility.
So it's like a BitTorrent swarm of love.
Right. It's like a BitTorrent swarm of love. Or, for example, swingers is another form of non-monogamy that we haven't brought up at all. But swingers are, basically monogamous. It's just couples that go out and have sex with other people, sometimes for fun. And they tend to build friendships with the people they have sex with because that's a natural thing to happen. But they don't get super emotionally involved. And swingers, there's more studies on than polyamorous people because they've been around a lot longer. They tend to have as good, or sometimes some studies suggest better outcomes than monogamous couples, and tend to have as good and sometimes better relationship satisfaction than monogamous couples, and similar divorce rates and happier sex lives. It doesn't have to be this huge emotional drain.
Yeah, it seems like it's really good to come at it from a position of stability and strength as opposed to fear of loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Regardless of if you're going to be open or monogamous.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're the kind of person who is not able to fulfill your own needs, you might want to work on that before pulling somebody into a relationship.
What kind of ideas? So I'm pretty sure that I want kids. What kind of ideas do you guys have about how you can raise children, keeping in mind all the things we just discussed? How do you see maybe your own personal ideas of what you maybe could do?
There's a lot of different ways it can go. And honestly, I'm kind of more in the boat myself of just understanding and realizing all the possibilities there are, and not knowing for 100%, which way we want to go. Or when we first began this process, we didn't know, are we just going to be swingers? Are we going to are we going to be okay with each other dating other people independently? We had no idea of where we were going to go with that. It's just an openness to, Katie was talking about, experiment, right? And just, figure out where things go. There's a lot of different models of people that are polyamorous and have kids. For a lot of people, their lovers are almost like godparents to the kids. There's a lot of polyamorous people that that co-inhabit, and it's the kids have multiple parents as opposed to, more than 2 parents at least. There's just a lot of different ways it can go about, and it all just depends on where we are when we get to that point,
Oh, for myself personally, I guess I've been kind of on the fence of if I wanted kids. I assumed I wanted kids, and then I thought about it, and I was like, wait, no, I don't want kids. And now that I'm getting older, and I don't know if it's biological or what, I'm starting to think maybe I do want kids, but I still don't know. I think the most important thing for me in having kids was just making sure that I was in a stable situation, whether that be a couple and sometimes we date casually outside of that, I would be okay with that. Or if we had already established lovers because we had been polyamorous, I would be comfortable with that. I probably wouldn't want to be spending a ton of time dating and looking for new partners while I had kids, just because of the potential chaos that it could introduce. But I think if you're really conscious about it, it doesn't necessarily have to do that.
I've seen kids grow up where they sort of have multiple different parents. I have some nieces and nephews that, my mom and my dad helped to raise them in addition to their mom and dad, grandma and grandpa. And I really see a lot of benefit from kids that are exposed to a lot of different ideas and people, and they learn how to interact. One of the things that I see in our educational system is the segregation by age, right? They put all the kids together the same age So there's no one older. There's no interaction with older people except for, your one focus of the teacher. And it sort of creates this narrowing of their viewpoint and even narrowing of their intellect in a lot of ways. Whether or not we're choosing monogamy or polyamory or anything in between, it seems like it really behooves us to make sure that our kids have a lot of exposure to a lot of different ideas and that we don't segregate them on the basis of age or parents, obviously unless there's some kind of bad actor.
That's a really cool perspective. Hey guys, I'm sorry to bail out, but I've really got to take off. I'm doing some apartment hunting and everything. But yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Great to see you.
Yeah,
he's got a date. He's got
dating the realtor.
All those relationships to take care of.
Anthony, I think that's a really good point. And regardless of if I'm in a monogamous relationship or non-monogamous situation, if I have kids or not, if I want to have kids, I would want to have like a larger community of people involved in their lives, like close friends and a network of people that were actually involved, as opposed to just kids being isolated.
Yeah, I'm really I'm super interested in the idea of how do we create new educational systems and raise free and sovereign little human beings. I really see that as the primary mechanism of change for society. I'm never going to change, some 50-year-old or my parents or grandparents. They're not going to change their minds any more than it's practical for them to do so. But our kids are really where the opportunity is for increasing the freedom of society.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that the goal shouldn't just be freedom. Like freedom is layer one. Just like freedom is really layer one. Layer two is like responsibility and courage and I guess wisdom to some degree and reliability. Like there's a bunch of virtues that are functional, and they're functional within certain contexts, right? But some maybe more than others, but like to build like to create a sovereign bad person is not good for the world.
There might even be a case to say that that's an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a sovereign bad person. If you're sovereign, that you understand, maybe from a heuristics kind of play.
There's forms of chaos that are bad. Like, okay, kids need stability, and like certain types of instability like increase the risk of schizophrenia, for example. Like you can say like a schizophrenic mind is a mind that's like freed from certain constraints that a normal mind has, or a schizophrenic person in some ways maybe might live more free in some ways than others, but it's a negative form of chaos.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right. Yeah, definitely both chaos and order have their positive and negative aspects. If you go into order, you get boring and also tyrannical.
Yeah.
Get, just less freedom.
Yeah.
This is why I really like the term sovereign. And I know it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I guess when I use it, I like to think in terms of sovereign means that I recognize my own life and I recognize the life of others. I recognize freedom as being a good ideal, but that I need to understand how to have the freedom to control myself, to act in a way that's rational towards myself and towards my fellow beings, right? To be able to enter contracts. Like most people can't even enter a contract because they don't even have the sovereignty to understand what it means to enter a contract. I know it's got kind of a bad name, the sovereign citizens, the FBI, and they put them on the terrorist list.
What, really?
Oh, yeah, no.
I guess that's
it's an oxymoron.
People who read The Sovereign Individual.
Oh, no, that's a
okay.
But I mean, we want to capture all the good things of freedom, right? Without being like, I have the freedom to, shoot up a theater or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think we can all agree that too much order is bad, too much chaos is bad, but both order and chaos are needed, and some balance needs to be struck.
I'm curious about the flip side. We've talked a lot about downsides and possible upsides of non-monogamy.
Well, let me talk about something. A year ago, I was telling you on the previous episode, I was in a Buddhist temple, and I practiced there for a month learning meditation. After I left there, when I was in the temple, I took an oath to say that I believe in holy things. After I left, I thought a lot about what that meant. And I ended up, I talked to this fellow when I was in Chiang Mai, and I said to him, what do you think that means to believe in holy things? And he said that when he was traveling in India, he went from temple to temple, and he would walk into especially a Sikh temple, and they would say to him, "Oh, welcome, brother. We'll find you a place to sleep. We'll find you some food." To Sikhs, food is holy. Or he even said to me, like one step further, he said, food is God to the Sikhs. So because it's something that sustains you, it can keep you alive. So it's like the physical manifestation of divinity. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, if something that can keep you alive is holy, then something that can create life must also be holy. For a few years of my life, I was rather careless with my sex life. Like I had a lot of partners and things. And after that, I thought, well, I don't think I want to do that anymore. That's not really what I'm about. I decided to become abstinent, not to have any casual sex at all. And I thought, well, I really don't want to have sex with a woman in a situation where, what if she gets pregnant and then it's not the optimal situation for me to take care of the child or something like that? There's a very complex situation. So I really wanted to err on the side of caution.
So you're saying that sex can be holy?
Yes.
It is. I think he's saying sex is holy by its very nature of procreation.
Yes. Or at least, that's one way of looking at it. To create life is something precious, and therefore sex is also precious.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to that story. There was a time where I was just like, I need to have as much as I can get. And then I was like, I didn't really gain anything from that. There was just a lot of like emotional turmoil and pain mostly, And I didn't get, I guess I learned my lesson, so there was some value there. But yeah, I definitely decided, like you did, that maybe I should be a little more selective.
I had a time like that where I was like, I just want to, be free with it. I gained a lot from that time. That's not what I want anymore, because I feel like I kind of gained what I needed to gain from that time. I mean, I did go through a lot of emotional turmoil. And that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is sex is so tied to emotions, at least for me, but also I think for a lot of people, it releases a lot of chemicals in your brain, especially for women, that bond you to the person, and it can make you fall in love with that person very quickly, and it can completely change your attitude towards the person. And so when you separate, then, it feels like a big loss, physically and emotionally. But I gained a lot from that time, because when you have that kind of experience with someone, people tend to open up more. And so being not just physically, but like emotionally intimate and having deep conversations with people you might not necessarily have otherwise, like on a different level, I learned a lot there. And I also learned a lot about myself and how my emotions work and how to ride those chaotic waves. And I don't know, I think it was good for me. I don't want it anymore because I don't want that chaos. But
I think that's a good description of why we're pursuing the idea of polyamory as opposed to promiscuity, because we recognize that sex is holy in a certain sense, and we recognize that does create bonds to each other on both sides. That's why I think it's better to pursue, if you're going to pursue multiple partners, to pursue it and from a sort of polyamory kind of perspective, as opposed to just being like, oh yeah, she's hot, let's bang her,
right,
or vice versa.
And even if you're going to pursue casual sex and promiscuity, to recognize that what you're doing is something important, and you are opening yourself up to really deep emotions and a lot of chaos if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
Like when you have someone in your arms, that's like, and they're about as vulnerable as they'll ever be. That's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Cool. So
that's good.
Everybody
really good. That's great. That's the best conclusion right there.
Is that a sign that we should end, or do you guys want to keep going?
No, I think that's a great conclusion, right? Let's have some responsibility for each other, and no matter what you choose, let's be honest and let's care for each other.
Big hug, guys. Group hug.
Group hug with all the crypto hippie family.
Spooning.
We really covered a lot of stuff today, you guys. Thanks for showing up and bringing your A game like always. It's been real. It's been fun.
Don't forget about our affiliate code.
Oh yeah. All right, yeah.
Check the link below if you're interested in going to Anarchapulco. I'm sure there will be plenty of polyamorous people there.
And you'll be able to learn more and ask all about it.
Let's do it.
Try it yourself. All right. Thanks, Crypto Hippies. See you next time.
That's great. We'll see you guys.
Adios.
Bye.